if after watching this video you find yourself on the hunt for a car named after your favourite cryptid, be it the Skoda Yeti, the Seat Chupacabra or the BMW Beast of Bodmin Moor, then don't forget to use CarVertical, the super-powered super search that cross-references a number of databases from around the globe to give you all the information you want to know on any potential used car purchase. All you need is either a registration number or VIN and just 60 seconds of your time. And even better, my discount code has just been beefed up, so you'll get 20% off instead of the old 10% when you use JAYEMM for your CarVertical search. Hello everybody, today, is it a hatchback? Is it an estate car? Is it an SUV? The answer to all of these things is yes, because I am driving the Skoda Yeti 4x4. But is it a good car? Well, let's find out. Now, I'm not entirely sure whether this is a British thing or just me being me, but I've always had a bit of a love for an oddball, and the Skoda Yeti appeals to me very much on that level. However, when it comes to recommending a car, I think you do need a little bit more than that. And so, for the last 2 years, Graham has been trying to persuade me why this is more than simply a strange car for strange people. It's taken a while for me to finally drive it, but today I am. And before I deliver my verdict, I'd like to share with you what it is that he thinks makes this so great. And here is said email, which was titled, "The Greatest Car in the World, brackets, probably." He says, here is something that is super practical, well-equipped, reliable, and a nice place to be. It handles well with Evo magazine, giving it 4 stars out of 5 about 10 years ago. You can throw it into a corner. This 2010 example had a 170 horsepower engine, which has subsequently had the diesel emissions fix performed, and then a remap, now giving it about 200 horses. Standard torque, by the way, for this is 258 pound-foot, that's 350 newton meters. It has a Haldex-based 4x4 system, meaning that by default it's essentially front-wheel drive, but as and when required, it can put the rear wheels into service too. It is apparently unstoppable with the correct tyres in all weathers. It currently has cross-climate 2s on it, and just to back up those off-road credentials, it even has a button down here marked simply as off-road. It will get over 50 mpg if you're careful, and 35 to 40 if you're not. And it features a design which he calls anti-style. It's also apparently mega cheap to insure because the average driver is about 250 years old, and a couple of years ago he at 31 was paying £300 a year, but now with insurance prices having gone up quite a bit, he's paying about £450. It's a car with a cult following that never really had a true successor, though it did have a sort of predecessor in the form of the equally weird Skoda Roomster, which was based on a slightly earlier platform. This one is built on the same one that underpins the equivalent Octavia and also the Mark V and 6 Golf. I honestly have never really quite understood what the distinction between the Roomster and this is, because though that did predate this car only by a few years, and they were both on sale for about 5 of the same years, with that going out of production in 2015 and this finally ending in 2017, to be replaced by the Karoq and the Kamiq. Equally uninspiring cars, I have to say. Faceless, generic, bland, crossover SUV things. This at least has a bit of personality about it, and I've got to say, quite a bit of go too. Now, the Yeti was available with a frankly baffling number of engines, considering the least powerful was 105 horses and the most powerful 170. I didn't realise you could have quite so many steps between those 2 points. Now, not all were available at all points in time across all markets, but in terms of petrol, you could have a 1.2, 1.4 or 1.8 litre, and in terms of diesel, you could have a 1.6 or a 2 litre. All of these are 4-cylinder, turbocharged and transversely mounted. You could have either a 6-speed manual gearbox or a 6-speed DSG for the majority of the range, with a couple of them having either a 5-speed manual or a 7-speed DSG. This has the 6-speed manual and it's actually quite a nice box to use. As you can see, the rain has now begun, so it may be the case we put that 4-wheel drive system to the test. But as it is, I've got to say, out of the box, I'm really quite liking this car. Yes, it's an odd duck. Yes, it's weird, but I also appreciate the fact it owns that. So, it's not a particularly big car, just over 4.2 meters long, but it does have room for, I would say, 4 fully grown adults or 5 people if some of them are a little bit smaller. In the back, you'll also find an interesting arrangement for the rear seats. So each one is independent and you can remove them however you like. The outer, the left and the right, can be slid either forwards or backwards by I think about 80 millimeters, and if you remove the center one, they can even slide inwards as well, which is nice. Even with the rear set up to give your passengers maximum legroom, there is still plenty of boot space. Though it's not huge, for this size of car, I'd say it's pretty decent. And again, this is one of many reasons I'd happily recommend something like this over an SUV equivalent. Because you see, if you hop into something like, say, the VW T-Roc, well, it looks like a car that's about this size, if not actually a little bit bigger. But when you get inside it, you do find it to be a little bit cramped. This has reasonable headroom. It feels like it's actually a car that's just been stretched up rather than lifted, and that I appreciate. I can imagine there would be a great number of reasons why somebody might buy a car like this. So what was it that led Graham to buy it? On account of the fact that, by his own admission, he's about 50 years too young for one. Well, as it happens, he has an NB generation Mazda MX-5, a car that he loves, although one that has, on occasion, proven quite problematic, and I know will shock you to hear, has suffered a little bit from corrosion lately, so he wanted something that was fairly sensible to drive about for day-to-day and winter duties. He had a few different options available, but then one day, a friend of his who goes ballooning took him out in his Skoda Yeti, and he thought, you know what, actually, this thing's brilliant because it will go anywhere, do anything, it's reasonably economical, and if you want it to be, it's actually kind of fun too. Now we're about to head through town, which means I'm not going to be able to have too much fun, so let me tell you a few other things about the car. In Britain, we had quite a few different trim levels available, more in fact even than in Europe, where I think they had 3 and we had 5. This is the top of the line, the Elegance, but even so, if you're expecting a leather-lined palace, this is not the car for you. Now, as you can probably tell, this car is no longer standard, but in terms of interior, the only real change has been the fitment of a Pioneer aftermarket head unit to replace the likely somewhat dated original. It works fine, and I expect many people now will have fitted something similar. You do, though, have heated seats with several different settings available. You've also got your dual zone climate control, electric windows all round, though disappointingly no sunroof, and generally speaking, it's a fairly decent thing to spend your time in. These leather seats are very comfortable. You've got an excellent view of both the road and the bonnet, so if you were to take this car off-road, I think actually it would be reasonably easy to place. As it is around town, the thing feels so tiny, it's a delight. I mean, this is really a very pleasant thing. And if anything, I know this might sound like a very, very odd comparison, but the car this is kind of reminding me of is the Mercedes A-Class that my mum had when we were kids. Because you see, she wanted something that was big on the inside, but kind of small on the outside, and the first gen A-Class was actually kind of cool. This has similar vibes about it. I can see this being a very, very popular school bus. It's got just about everything you need beyond, unfortunately these days, ULEZ compliance. For that reason, the petrol engine variants seem to be the ones that now command the most money. Prices for these start at about £2,000 and go up to as high as about 20. However, by the time you've got to around about 5 or 6, you could likely get yourself into something like this, an early example with one of the higher grade engines and the all-important all-wheel drive. And for me, I think actually this is probably the spec that I would go for. The diesel is economical, the all-wheel drive is practical, and it's, you know, nicely enough appointed in here. It certainly doesn't feel cheap and nasty. This, I am told, is one of the key differences between the Yeti and the Roomster. That being a slightly older car based on an older platform, inside just doesn't feel quite as up to date. The engine selection also apparently isn't quite as good, though here I really do think they missed a trick to build a hot version, though I did hear a rumour about somebody who stuffed the drivetrain from a TTRS into one. And that would be quite a laugh. I'd like a go at that, because that sounds like my kind of car. This engine, emissions issues aside, which I admit can be a deal breaker for some, is actually fairly good. It's not particularly gruff at low speeds, it's quite responsive, and it does not lack for pace. The 6-speed gearbox then is a very nice partner. All of the controls are fairly light, easy to use. The clutch is very intuitive. The brakes nice and responsive, fairly smooth. A little on the overly servoed side, but that's what I'd expect from something like this. The throttle, meanwhile, is pretty good. You can modulate it with a reasonable amount of precision, and even the steering has a nice little bit of weight to it as well. But what happens when you find yourself on your favourite bit of road and you want to have a little bit of fun? Let's find out. The car pulls very strongly, geared quite well too. The suspension is great. It's soaking up the lumps and bumps in this road really nicely. At speed, the steering does become a little vague. The car's quite keen to turn in, but the wheel doesn't really report back to you how much you're asking of the chassis. So I'm going through these bends knowing it's damp and greasy out there and the car should be struggling, but it's not talking back to me. This really is very common for pretty much all VAG cars of that period and many others. It's a shame really, because it ruins a great many of otherwise fundamentally brilliant cars. In any case, I can certainly carry enough speed, and once you've got up to the national speed limit, it adopts a fairly decent stance. It's a very pleasant thing. I'm having a good time over here. The wind noise is quite noticeable, though that may be in part due to the fact this car has also had a roof rack fitted. Though I should point out one of the other minor but important modifications that Graham has performed is the fitment of some extra sound deadening. So he's put a bit of extra dynamat under the bonnet and also the back seats. Apparently from factory, Skoda don't really bother with quite as much of it as some other brands, and so the car was a little bit unrefined for his tastes. It's nice to see young people do stuff like that. When I call him a young person, he's basically the same age as me. I think he's 33. I'm 34. People don't believe that, I don't know why. Grip really is very good in this car. I have to say, I was being a bit of a hooligan there, and it was fine. It just doesn't communicate to me that it's going to be okay, and that's a frustration. I like this car a lot. A heck of a lot. I was out in a Land Rover Freelander 2 yesterday, and from this point actually I'm getting kind of similar feel from it. Probably doesn't help that both of them were a black car with a contrasting lighter interior, slightly elevated driving position, and they've both got a reasonable amount of room inside. Of course, the Land Rover had the cachet of being a Land Rover, but I would say there are equally as many people that'll be put off by that badge as lured to it. So, has the Yeti been faultless? Well, no. Though generally speaking, they have a fairly decent reputation. In line with the Mark V Golf, with which they share many parts, they do also share a few of that car's issues, including one that has been experienced by Graham, which was a failing clutch slave cylinder. And frustratingly, that slave cylinder is inside the bell housing. So it's a little bit of a pig to get to. The part itself isn't all that expensive, but the labour can sting a bit. That really has been the one and only major mechanical malady that he's had, though during my research I did find there is one Yeti-specific issue you need to look out for, and that is the fact that apparently at factory they didn't make the wiring for the door quite long enough, and so over time it can break and present itself in some unusual ways. So you might find things suddenly not working as they should, or just not working at all. And this means you have to do a bit of rewiring, sort things out, and this, I'm told, is a fairly common issue, though not one that Graham himself has experienced. It is on these kind of roads with nice fast sweeping bends that you can easily take at the national speed limit that the car feels the happiest, the steering the most interactive, and the whole thing a little bit more communicative. Once you start to press on a little harder, you try and ask for 8/10, the whole thing just goes, I don't really fancy it. But up until that point, it's a very pleasant experience. And yes, I know it has slightly oddball looks, but let's be honest here, it's no Fiat Multipla, and it is at least distinctive. I think it's got a little bit of personality about it, and that I really do appreciate. So for me, the Skoda Yeti gets a thumbs up. Anyway, I want to say a big thank you to Graham for bringing it out, and as ever, to you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, and subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.